to start out by thanking you all for registering today. Um, I really appreciate you making the time to be in community with us. And as Yael said, I am Kenrya Rankin, and today I'm going to be presenting on the topic of closing the power gap and how collective action can help us to remake AI and our world. We're going to cover a decent amount of ground today, and so I just wanted to give a quick top line agenda for the webinar. Y'all can all see that. Starting out with a welcome, I really want to take some time to just kind of set some expectations for what we're going to do today. So, first off, you're not going to master AI during this webinar, and quite frankly, neither am I. This field moves at a breakneck speed, and we only have quite a short time together. But we will go over some key industry and movement vocabulary. You're going to hear some examples of how AI impacts your rights. You're going to hear about an approach for making that impact a net positive. We're going to uncover a few people and organizations who are working to make AI ethical and transparent, which we believe contributes to that net positive effect. And you're going to take home some links for resources that can be used to fuel collective action in this space. So, first up, a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. So this is my bio, and Yael read a lot of it earlier, and I'm not going to go over it. There's a few things that are highlighted, but the reality is, I don't feel like it says a whole lot about who I am. Like, those are some accomplishments and some things that I've done, but I think it's even more important to go back a bit. When I was a kid, I spent more evenings than I can even count riding in the back of a white work van. And that van belonged to my dad, who was then and still is a computer tech. And he would be on call quite frequently. And that meant racing through the night often to get to a client's mainframe so that he could get it back online. And I don't know how many of you, like, I don't know how old y'all are, if any of you were here in the 80s and were ever around these massive machines that were used to house computing power back then. But they would be in these rooms that were just big enough to really accommodate the massive hunk of steel and a few bodies whenever they needed to be maintained. And I had a love-hate relationship with those visits on those nights that were, that started out in the back of my dad's van. What I hated was that it was cold. I am always cold, but those rooms were always air conditioned to high hell in order to protect the equipment. And I just remember being an icicle all the time. But then there was what I loved. And that really came down to the hush of it all. So for those who have been around mainframes, you know that they're buzzy. Like, they were essentially the ultimate white noise machine before that really became a thing. But being in those rooms with my father and my little sister felt like we were shutting out the rest of the world. It was like we had this cool, quiet secret that we were the only ones who shared. When in reality, honestly, it was just that my dad didn't have a babysitter for us. And so we had to go along. But the other thing that I really liked about those times was that it felt like an adventure. Like, my little sister and I were hanging out while my father got the machine back up and running. And while I never did anything much beyond just watch him intently and make my sister laugh inappropriately, I still remember how proud I felt of the work that he would complete on those late night on call days. Years later, I found myself walking across the campus of Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, which is where I'm from in Ohio. And I was a high school student taking summer engineering courses. I did that every summer. And while I was there, I will remember those days with my dad. And you would think that that would end up pushing me into the STEM field. But one thing that I actually realized while I was on that campus was that tech, I thought, wasn't really for me. Like, I love STEM, but I loved writing more. And the idea of living in this space of creativity every day really called to me. And so I ended up majoring in journalism, and I worked on magazines and digital news sites for many, many years. But then the darndest thing happened. The tech came back. I started writing about the Internet of Things at Fast Company and producing video ed tech content for Verizon Foundation. And it wasn't long before I remembered just how much I loved those nights with my dad. and how much I loved digging into technical text and making them make sense and resonate for folks who don't necessarily have that background. And so, if you fast forward a few years, I ended up at Mozilla Foundation, where I get to do exactly that. And even bigger and more important to me is that I get to craft movement building infrastructure. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that means to me. But I wouldn't necessarily call this a pivot so much as this expansion and embracing of the things that have captured me since my childhood, that hush, that adventure, and that pride in work. And we're going to take those things along with us today as we talk about closing this gap. But first, this. So, even beyond that anecdote, even beyond that, long highlighted bio, this slide really tells you more about me than any anecdote ever could. And it totally informs everything that you're going to see in this webinar. First, I'm basically a stack of books in a trench coat. I read just like this kid, really, really fast with my eyes wide open. Fighting for liberation for all people is in my DNA. I have never met a spreadsheet that I didn't simultaneously love and want to clean up a bit. Steven Universe, that's that guy down there with the stars in his eyes, has a super outsized influence on my life. And then there's Beyonce, and there's not much more I can say except for there's Beyonce. Those who get it, get it. And that's enough about me. I want to talk about the Mozilla Foundation, or MoFo, as we like to call it. The organization has its roots in the open source movement, and the Mozilla project was created back in 1998. And the first release was actually the Netscape browser suite source code. So, any of you who used Netscape back in the day, that was us. That browser harnessed the creative power of thousands of programmers, and it pushed innovation in the browser market, specifically because it came from the angle of open source and knowing that many hands make for lighter work. Fast forward to 2003, and the Mozilla Project created the Mozilla Foundation, which is where I work, and that is the independent nonprofit organization, and it's supported by donors and company partners. And we are the folks behind, you see this little logo here, the Firefox browser, which hopefully a lot of you are using today. But more than just creating this browser, which is the thing that everyone knows us for, we're advocates. We believe that the internet should be and remain an open, accessible, global, public resource. And we're doing work to make that happen. And we call the movement to ensure this the Internet Health Movement. So, we're going to dive into some grounding vocabulary so that we are all on the same page and so we know what we're talking about when we talk about things. So, first up is AI algorithm. And this is essentially a set of instructions that tell software how to do something on its own whenever it's triggered. And these algorithms power AI. AI, or artificial intelligence, is a system of AI algorithms that can change based on whatever data it's fed. This tech helps computers simulate human capabilities, such as answering your kids' homework questions, writing code, or recommending the perfect car for you and your family. Now, machine learning is actually a subset of AI, and it enables a machine to quote unquote learn. And use these quotation marks because I always think it's important that we highlight that these machines are not human. So they don't actually learn, they don't actually teach, they don't actually think. They are fed information and then they do things based on that. But so machine learning enables these machines to quote unquote learn and improve their ability to complete a task based on experience with its training data. It uses algorithms to look for patterns in that data, and then it uses that pattern recognition ability to classify information, carry out tasks, and make decisions, all based on what it predicts that most humans would do if they were faced with a similar task. At Mozilla, we talk a lot about trustworthy AI. And quite simply, that's just AI that's worthy of your trust. It's AI that considers accountability, agency, and individual and collective well being at every turn. Agency for us means that we, the people, maintain control over the ways that we interact with AI, and that includes how it impacts our privacy. Accountability means that the folks who build these systems take responsibility for any harm that their systems cause users. And more than that, that they're able to actually find the source of that harm, um, and then to be able to rectify it. And so many systems are what we call black boxes, where we can't see inside and we can't see outside, and so that type of iteration and accountability can't possibly happen. Now, those definitions are pretty cut and dry, but do y'all know what isn't? If you're looking at the screen, I'm sure you can guess it's the definition for open source AI. There are so many stakeholders around the world who believe in the power of open source, and so they've been working really hard to create a comprehensive definition that we can all use. And so when I was working on this presentation, I was trying to figure out which version of that made the most sense to pull, and I really fell in love with this version that was created by the Open Source Initiative, which works to educate and advocate for open source in the AI space. And this definition simply reads that open source AI is an AI system that anyone can use and that grants all users the right to use it without asking for permission, study how and why it works, modify it, share it, and access the preferred form of information for modifying the system. So that could be, you could have access to the training data info, you could have access to source code, model parameters, or any combination thereof, which is key to being able to actually use it in an open source space. But this work is bigger than technical jargon like AI and machine learning. We also have to define some movement terms in order to have this conversation. And so, first up is intersection, which is, a place where things converge, where they come together. Well, when we're talking about social movements, this is the sweet spot where the concerns and the aims of two or more movements meet. We also hear a lot about intersectionality in this space, and it's a word that we hear really often, but quite frankly, it's not always used correctly. It's the name of a theoretical framework that was developed by the Combahee River Collective and other Black feminists in the United States, but it didn't actually carry that name until 1989 when legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, made it so. Now, the framework is meant to show how the social categorizations that we all live with, including race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and ability, create these overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination. It's a common misconception and talking point that intersectionality is primarily concerned with identity, but at its core, intersectionality is not so much about who someone is, but about what I call the isms and the obias. And those really come down to how who they are is used to oppress them. So you might be asking yourself, why is this important in a talk where we're talking about AI? And what it really comes down to is that this framework does a great job of illustrating the fact that none of us live in silos, and neither do the harms that can arise when AI is not trustworthy. In fact, those harms actually are amplifications of the systemic and structural harms that are as old as time, like racial justice, disability justice, all the things that impact us, those isms and those obias. And that's why my research is grounded in understanding how those key social justice issues of our time intersect with AI. And what we found is that if you step back and peer at AI from this angle, it's quite clear that it's not just a technical issue, it's a human one. And human challenges require human solutions that may or may not include tech. And that leads me to our final definition, which is movement building. So if you talk to anyone from MoFo, you're going to hear about this. And that's because it is the primary function of our nonprofit. We define it as the process of building collective power, which we can use to boost the work of social movements so that we can work together to create systemic change. Or perhaps more simply put, we want to grow the number of people and organizations who are committed to creating a healthier digital world. And when we apply the lens of trustworthy AI, the concept is really just about encouraging more people like you to lift up trustworthy AI as a necessity, not an option. Now, you'll notice that I said like you. That wasn't a mistake. I know that there are people in this audience who work on AI every single day and are involved in creating policy and directing bills. And I know that there are folks whose work isn't squarely in this field, but who are curious about how it might show up in both in their work and in their lives. And the thing is that I realize that it really doesn't matter what your level of professional expertise is in this space because I believe that you have something to offer. And I love this quote, which came from some interviews conducted for my team, because it reminds us of that fact and it forces us to think about who the experts really are and how we can welcome you all into the AI space. And so this is one of the few things that I'm going to read verbatim today. The quote reads, "Tech companies, including Mozilla, think they have all the answers. We should listen to others in the social justice space who have actually been doing the hard work for decades. And that listening is the starting point for movement building." I also love this quote from Sophia Noble because it reminds us of that bigger picture that the systemic issues that we observe in many current applications of AI, and to be clear, they are systemic, call for systemic solutions. Okay, so I'm not an artist, okay? Excuse me, and I think that that's clear from this image, but this is an illustration that my colleague Solana and I created, and it's our representation of the ways that social justice areas and AI converge. And the question that it brings up for me, and I'm guessing for some of you, is how do we bring them all together at this intersection without anybody getting hurt? And the next couple of slides seek to uncover that answer. We're going to examine what's currently happening at those intersections, starting with going over a few harms that are out there. We're going to go over a few positive things, which we at Mozilla call public interest tech. And we're going to talk about some of the folks who are working on these types of issues actively. We call those folks actors, and they can include activists, researchers, funders, civil society organizations, academics, other researchers like me who work, in nonprofit space, government bodies, industry representatives, and digital rights advocates. Anybody who cares about making sure that we mitigate the harms that AI can pose at these intersections. So, first up, we're going to look at a few harms that are being caused by the way that AI is deployed. Back in 2019, researchers found that hospitals across the United States were using an AI powered hospital triage system that was created by United Health Group to assess who gets medical attention when. The problem is that the system used past healthcare spending to put people in line rather than their actual health risk. The result, which quite frankly should have been predictable, was that it directly discriminated against Black patients who had less income to spend on their health care, thus exacerbating an economic justice issue that already existed and placing them at the back of the line for additional care behind white people who were actually healthier overall when you looked at the objective findings. So the company actually worked with the researchers to revamp this system. This is an example of where research can really help to turn things around. And so the system has been updated. However, it's not the only system that's been in use that does this and uses this data to discriminate against people of color. And that's just in the United States alone. There are other systems that are doing the same thing. It's literally just the one that got caught. Moving over to environmental justice, we know that the development and the use of AI are accelerating fossil fuel extraction because the AI supply chain, which is powered by industries that are extractive at their core, rushes to mine the materials that are needed to create chips and other components that go into the devices that run AI applications. That extraction benefits companies in the global north financially, the ones that are building these AI systems. But what we also know is that the environmental impacts of that work actually hit the global south the hardest. And so, if we continue to look at that area and we look at the Indian state of Haryana, the government uses an AI system called the Family Identity Data Repository. And that system uses demographic and socioeconomic data to determine financial assistance eligibility for the elderly within the state. Now, that sounds reasonable, right? Like, that sounds like the kind of data that it makes sense to use to determine how much money to send people based on their needs. And it could be fine, but the system has been incorrectly marking people dead and then blocking them from the benefits that they actually need to survive. And because government officials have placed complete trust in the system, they do not have a process in place for human overrides. In fact, it took one man 11 individual visits to the government office to get an official to admit that he was actually alive. And that only then did they reverse the ruling that had originally taken away his benefits. But that is not tenable, and it's no way for a system that millions of people depend on to live to run. But all is not lost. There are actors who are working to address issues just like these, like IT for Change, which works on tech policy, data justice, and gender justice on the ground in India. Global Indigenous Data Alliance, which asserts Indigenous control over Indigenous data in locations around the world. And this researcher, whose name I refuse to butcher, who uses machine learning and spatial data sets to help people visualize the impact of spatial apartheid in her native South Africa. Okay, now we get to move on to the fun stuff. These are examples of public interest tech or applications of AI that actually mean us well. So, Avery Smith is a software engineer based in the United States whose wife died from skin cancer, in large part because the doctors didn't recognize the signs of skin cancer on her dark skin. Smith was determined that that could never happen to anyone else, and so he took his expertise and created the Black Skin Health AI dataset and the accompanying web app, which is called Melologic. And that app uses AI to help Black patients and the people who take care of them to accurately visualize and diagnose skin conditions on Black skin. Moving over to Chile, between 1973 and 1990, Pinochet disappeared over 1,100 people. And now the government of the country is planning to employ AI to search for them. Another positive application is that in Texas, here in the United States, the Austin AI housing analysis uses an AI system that evaluates historical housing development and then uses that data to create housing plans and policies that are more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable than the ones that came before it. So it's clear, I think that it's easy to demonize AI because we can see with our own eyes some of the ways it's negatively impacting us. But there are people who are using it to do us well. And when we can focus our energy and our attention and our funding on those applications, we can actually move the needle on how it impacts us collectively. And so there are some folks who are doing that, starting with AI for Good Foundation, which coordinates stakeholders who want to lean into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, all through the lens of creating AI systems that have no net environmental footprint, which is pretty cool. And then you have Bits and Bomb, which is based in Germany, and it operates at the intersection of environmental justice and AI, holding convenings and building community for folks who are like-minded in that space. And then last but not least, we have Blue Ridge Labs, which incubates financial tech products and services with the aim of helping under-resourced people in the United States thrive, despite the discrimination that frequently locks them out of funding. It is, quite tough oftentimes for folks who have been marginalized, especially people of color within the United States, to obtain funding, not only just on a personal level, but at the professional level to advance their businesses. And this lab works to circumvent that, which is pretty dope. So, all of these issues and actors have a few things in common. One, they want us to thrive using AI, But more than that, they're pulled from my latest build, which was mentioned at the top, which is called the AI Intersections Database. And this database grew out of research that started at Mozilla even before I joined. Oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago. I've been here for a little while. And so that research was meant to explore the AI impacts at those intersections that we've been talking about and the people who are poised to address those. And we had an early version that worked really well as an internal cataloging of the data that was unearthed in that research, those issues and those actors, like the things that we just covered on the last couple of slides. But the end goal was always to make this an external tool that serves as a movement resource and models good alternative data governance as well. So it was clear that we needed a new version of the database, and that's where I stepped in. So my starting point was to create an external facing database, yes, but one that has a built-in mechanism for actors to provide permission to have their data included. And it's really important to me that this database walk the Mozilla talk and respect agency at every turn. Remember that trustworthy AI definition, right? We hold ourselves to that standard as well. And so, right now, you could hop on Twitter, which I'm never calling X, for 2 seconds, and you would see someone posting a how to, at least if you're on the tech side of Twitter, a how to on how to opt out of Meta using your info that you've fed into Facebook and Instagram to train its AI system. And that is the opposite of what this database does and of what we do and of what we hold up as being trustworthy. We don't require folks to opt out for things. We require you to opt in. So if someone is submitted to the AI intersections database, whether it's a self submission or a third party, they have to opt in to appear. They also have to opt into sharing their contact information directly with users. We don't post anything that folks haven't given us permission to post. So it's not like those sites where you have to claim your post in order to make changes to it. It doesn't exist if you don't say yes. Um, Another thing that was really important to us is that the database needed to be easy to update and expandable in all directions so that it can accurately reflect relevant issues, actors, and geographies as they expand over time and evolve over time. So the database currently tracks issues related to 7 justice areas. So those are community health and collective security, economic justice, environmental justice, disability justice, gender justice, human rights, and racial justice. But that wasn't always the case. So, as you know, I said I joined the team after this research started. And when I took over the project, one of the first things that I noticed was that disability justice was missing. And that's an easy thing for me to notice because I'm disabled. But I don't pretend to know everything. And so when someone inevitably pops up and says, hey, you forgot X in the future, it was crucial to me that it be easy to add justice areas to this database, hence being expandable in all directions. And ultimately, we think of the AI intersections database as infrastructure for movement. And it was designed to educate and to connect people and organizations around these spaces where these social justice issues intersect with AI impacts. And the hope is that they and you will in turn be better positioned to promote trustworthy AI as part of your work and help us to shift the public narrative. As you see, it all comes back to movement building. But the database isn't the only output for this build, although it is the main one. Launched in April, the database is a living, breathing resource that not only helps us to live our movement building philosophy, but helps other actors explore the breadth of ways that AI impacts society, facilitates deep partnerships, and advances the internet health movement's aims. But we didn't just want to build this one database. We also wanted to give folks a roadmap to build their own resources. And to that end, I'm crafting a paper that will detail the process of creating the database using the crowdsourced data commons model, in which data is pooled and shared as a common resource. And we hope that others will then use that paper to model their own products and projects that make use of alternative data governance models so that we can advance our collective goals. And that paper is coming later this year, August. Haha. Now, I'd like to take a quick scroll through the database. We're going to start with the home page, and I have a quick little screen recording here just so that I can show y'all what it looks like. So we've got our homepage here, and you'll see right away up top that you can search, or you can use filters to find the information you're looking for. We've got some quick information about what the site is. There are some featured actors and issues. And then further down here, you can see that we invite people to contribute to the database, whether it be actors or issues. And I just want to note before I move on to the next slide that all submissions to the site are vetted for relevance and accuracy and edited by me before they go live. And to reiterate that all actors must opt in to appearing and choose if their contact information will appear on the site as well. Here we have, one second. There we go. Here we have an example of an actor that opted into appearing into the database and sharing their contact information. So you see here, Woman at the Table. We have Caitlin, who is the lead of that organization, who would love to be contacted about potential partnerships. And so, you also can see over on the right-hand side, we categorize them as an actor type. We talk about what justice area they fall into. We categorize the AI impacts of their work, which really centers around bias and discrimination, and their service area is global, and that is listed here. Here we have an example of an issue that appears in the database. And one thing I want to call y'all's attention to here, we have all the same tagging on the right-hand side that relates directly to this issue. We also, you can see here, these sharing tools. And that was something that was a really important, and it seems like, oh, yeah, okay, of course, you share, yeah. But it's not just a simple thing because we were really thinking about the ways that we anticipate people using this database. This could be great for literally anyone, but in particular, I've already spoken to journalists about using this, and we've used it internally. Is that these share features don't only apply to individual entries. Like, you can use these to share this particular entry, but you could also run a search, have all of your results listed, and then use that to not only generate, search results, but to share them out with folks. So internally, we've used this feature already to generate and share lists of organizations to send grant RFPs to. We've used it to find people to tap for our MozFest convening that we're having in Amsterdam next month. It allows you to actually essentially get work done directly here on the site and then to work collaboratively with other people because it's quite easy to share. Next up, we have our about page. And this does some heavy lifting. You see up top, we have some history about the database and how it came to be and how it's meant to be used. We have here another opportunity to contribute an entry. Literally every single page has at least one place where you can contribute. I'm, again, a researcher on a research team. So, of course, we share our project scope and our methodology here. And we also include a glossary, and you'll see, words are important to me, which is why we started out with a lot of definitions, and we make that really clear here too. And you can expand them all here because we want folks to know what we're talking about when we say stuff like actor types and disability justice. And then last but not least, we share who made the site happen, and we tell folks how they can opt out of appearing because privacy and autonomy are everything for us. So you've got lots of opportunities to decide whether or not you want to be in the database as well. And then the last page I want to share is this page, which is called Get Involved. And it just links folks to other parts of the Mozilla project. So down here, you'll see we talk about joining us at MozFest. That's our massive stakeholder system of massive stakeholder stakeholder convenings. That is a tongue twister. And then also a call to take our money, which is also known as applying for our fellowships and grants. We know that a lot of the folks who will find this a useful resource will likely find other parts of the Mozilla project to be useful and helpful in their work as well. Now, before we go, because it is about time to wrap up, I want to provide contact info for all the organizations and people who I highlighted earlier, just in case you'd like to learn more about their work or reach out for potential collaboration. So I'll leave this up for a couple of seconds for anyone who wants to grab a screenshot. All right. Next up, so Mozilla and TechSoup Canada actually have a really awesome relationship. And so one of my teammates actually gave this lecture last year, and she and TechSoup Canada went on to partner on a blog series that centers trustworthy AI. What else? And those posts all live on TechSoup Canada's site. Here are links here. If you'd like to take a screenshot here, that way you'll know which titles you can search later if you want to do some additional reading around these issues. These are great resource for doing a deeper dive on some of the things that we talked about today. And that concludes my talk. I thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that it was useful. You'll see my contact information listed here, along with links to a lot of the things that I spoke about today. Um, there's a database link. There's links for how you can take our money. There's links about how you can connect with us for convening, some of our data sets that we offer that adhere to these values that we've spoken about today, and also some information that can help if you want to build your own AI systems that can also be lifted up as trustworthy. And with that, I turn things back over to Yael.
Thank you so much, Kenrya, for your presentation. It was really energizing and provoking. Really interesting to see what you and Mozilla have been working on. Um,
Thank you.
so, we again, if you have not already done so, we invite you to share your question with us, and you can do that by dropping them in the question box on the top of the GoToWebinar panel. We're getting like a lot of good reaction online. So one of the questions that we received was if an organization is not featured yet on the model, how can they become part of it?
Great question. So all you have to do is head to the database itself, and in the top right hand corner and everywhere else around the page, you'll see a button that says contribute to database. If you click there, a form pops up that is in built-in form assembly. Sorry, I'm always going to go into the builds because those are the things that I'm always thinking about. And you can use that form to submit an issue, which is, something that's happening at the intersection of AI and one of these social justice issues. Or you can submit an actor, and it can be you as an individual person. It can be the organization that you work for, as long as you are an authorized person to be able to do that. Or it can just be an organization that you think is awesome and that folks should know about. Um, our built-in mechanism allows us to then send verification emails directly to those people so that they can consent to being included and also make any corrections to their information. So I encourage folks, no matter how well you know the organization, submit them if you think that they're a good fit, and we will take it from there and get them in.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Um, Waiting for some other questions there. Um, it's more, do you have any comments on the most recent release of the Chat GPT 4?
Oh, do I have any comments? Let's see. I think that the capabilities that were demonstrated in the um, the video on launch day were pretty awesome. I think that it is the fact that they essentially cloned Scarlett Johansson's voice and used it without her permission after she had denied it goes directly against what we talk about when we talk about trustworthy AI. Um, and I think that while it is pretty cool to have a system that can chat with you, I love, the fact that you can interrupt and it doesn't get thrown off, that, it can take into account the inflection in your voice. All of these things I think are cool. However, um, as someone who is always thinking about how these things play into these intersections that we've been talking about, I think it brings up, this research that talks about how these voice assistants are typically voiced as what you would think of as a woman, um, because we have been socialized to think of women as being our helpers. And so when I hear this voice that is not only pitched to sound like it is supposed to represent a woman, that uses the voice of someone who did not give their consent, and that quite frankly is programmed to speak flirtatiously with the people that it's interacting with, those are red flags for me. um yeah, so that's what that brings up for me.
Absolutely. And with those concerns, what would be some of the recommendation? How can the public can take a bigger part in changing or orienting the direction of AI?
Okay, good question. So I think it starts with a lot of the things that are highlighted here, in these resources. I think the first step is education, quite frankly. It's hard to advocate to improve systems that we don't know a whole lot about. And so a lot of it looks like starting out by surveying the field and knowing what exactly is going on so that you know where to concentrate your efforts. Another thing is that I encourage people to really think about where they sit. So much of the work that I do is fueled by the passion that comes from me being an impacted party. And that's why in my bio, it starts out by saying that I am a Black disabled woman. Yeah, and those things not only inform who I am, but they inform the ways, as we go back to that definition of intersectionality that I covered earlier, the ways that those things are used against me. And so I find that it can be really gratifying to focus your advocacy on those areas that feel like they directly impact you. So to starting out, finding out more about the field, and then thinking more about yourself and where you fit into it and where you might want to direct your actions. And then that looks like using resources like this database or others to identify folks who are already doing the work. Recreating the wheel is not something that any of us wants to do. I don't think that we have the energy or the resources. And the fact of the matter is, the database lifts up hundreds of folks around the country who are already doing work. So then I would suggest that now that you know some about AI and those harms that are happening at those intersections, and you know some more about who you are and what you find to be important and what you are passionate about, that you then go out and find organizations that are also passionate about that same thing. And you use your energy to advocate within those spaces. It comes back to that concept that many hands make for lighter work. um, you can combine your efforts with others so that we can go farther than if you were just trying to advocate on your own. If you are someone who already works in this field, you're wonderfully positioned to be able to introduce the concepts of trustworthy AI within your own organization, from the ways that you interact with AI. Like at Mozilla, we have an entire like a handbook that explains to us the ways that we can engage with AI to do our work, explains why those parameters are important. And so it guides the ways that we do that. And that's creating systems like that in your own workplace can provide a wonderful opportunity to spread the gospel of trustworthy AI right where you are already. And yeah, so find your ways to advocate, whether that means to connect with organizations locally who are doing the work that you're passionate about, or doing it within your own sphere professionally. And there
hmm
are lots of organizations that you can join as a professional that care about these things as well. And I would suggest joining up with those, joining leagues with those organizations as well. Truly, collaboration, I think, is the key. Movement building is the key to us being able to unlock AI that means us well over AI that means us harm.
hmm Okay. And internally, because we are all organization that we work with a board. So, what would be some of the best way to approach this conversation with the organization or with the board when most people are not really well versed in AI capabilities?
Mm-hmm. So, we do here at Mozilla a lot of learning sessions. Sometimes it looks like us bringing folks in to talk about our research, much in the same way as what we're doing today. Sometimes it looks like folks within the organization lifting up things that they're interested in. It could be we do these seminars that are just these 5-minute lightning talks where you just share your screen and talk about something that you're passionate about. I am a massive fan of making sure that we are always learning, and I think that lifting up opportunities like that, they can be through employee resource groups could be a really great way to do that, especially when you think about individual groups that are marginalized and under-resourced and underrepresented within these spaces, providing, seminars and webinars and that kind of thing that really look at issues that impact those communities could be a wonderful way in. I think that lifting them up via your DEIB function is a way to get them in, but also just, creating a culture that is all about iterative learning and adding to your knowledge base and then using that information to actually inform the work of your organization is really key. And so I think that doing that type of programming, when it's backed by the commitment of your leadership, can be a really effective way to move the needle within your organizations.
Okay. And are there any accessibility related AI project that you would recommend check out?
Yes, and they're linked here on this slide that's up on the screen. Any of these, especially the ones at the bottom, are not necessarily officially affiliated with Mozilla. And then there were some on the previous slide that I think make sense as well. Hmm.
Okay. Um, does the foundation work at the intersection between the states like police, child protection, welfare, beyond health services, and its interaction with AI?
We do. We have several programs that work in at various intersections. I'm thinking about a lot of that work is really driven by our grantees and our fellows, where they can really apply their expertise in the field to those particular areas. So we have a part of our organizational program called Responsible Computing Challenge, which works with governments and with academic institutions around the world to help them to revamp their curricula for not just computer scientists, but technologists in general. So it can be folks who are studying humanities, people who are in computer science, people who are in journalism, but folks who think that these issues are important. We help to provide ethical and responsible AI training at the curriculum level around in countries around the world. We have the Common Voice Project, which is a project for collecting data, creating a data set that uses voices responsibly to be able to collect data from languages all around the world, including those that aren't necessarily documented online, while honoring and respecting the needs and the traditions of the folks who speak those languages. We have our environmental arm, which just actually announced a bunch of awardees last week who are doing work in industry and with nonprofits and with governments to address the footprint of AI from various angles. So yes, we like to take a multi-pronged approach to moving this work forward, and so our programming reflects that. And you can learn more about all of that if you go to foundation.mozilla.org. Um, and there's tons and tons of information about ways that you can get involved with those individual projects as well.
Hmm. Okay. Um, what do you think are the risks and challenges of AI use in storing and managing indigenous data when it comes
Mm,
to mitigating risk and ensuring data privacy?
yeah. So I will say, this is I am not indigenous, so I feel that this is, while I can form an opinion on it, it is not within my wheelhouse, and I don't pretend to speak for other people, and so I'm not going to do that. But what I will say is that I think that data sovereignty is really key, and it is important to us, and one of the ways that we, can really reinforce this idea of trustworthy AI in reality is that we listen to people and that we pay attention to what they are saying and what they are asking and what they are demanding around the ways that their data is used, and that we don't engage with it in ways that they are not interested in. For example, Mozilla, my team in particular, actually runs a podcast called IRL, and so what it essentially looks at is AI applications in real life. It is very much in conversation actually with this database. And we covered in the last season, I think, an organization and they're actually both featured in the database as well, that found that Whisper AI was using data from voice data related to their language, which is quite frankly dying out, and using it to train their system without any regard. Well, first of all, it wasn't accurate because they didn't bother to actually engage the people that it came from in the data that they were collecting. But then it also did not respect their customs and their traditions and their wishes around the ways that their language is used and shared. And so they use what they found from that data set to create their own that actually does that and lives into their values as a group of people and as a community. Um, and so I guess where I'm going with this is that it is important that we let other folks lead us. I provided a quote earlier in the session where I talked about how it's important for us to think about who the actual experts are. And I think that this is a wonderful example of the fact that I am not that expert. We are not those experts. But when we have enough humility to listen to what folks want, to resource them so that they can create those things rather than feeling as if we are the ones that the world has been waiting for to do them, that the outcomes are much more robust, much more respectful of the people who they are attempting to serve, and also much more useful.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and for taking the time to answer all this question. It is all the time that we have for today. Again, thank you, Kenrya, for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you, everyone that took some time out of their day to join us to attend this webinar. Just a reminder that we will be posting the recording of this video on our blog next week to keep up to date with its release and our programming. I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. It's called By the Cup, and you can also follow us on X, formerly Twitter. Yeah. And thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Y'all take care.